Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and completely dismantle everything you thought you knew about detecting lies. Welcome, everyone. Today, we are tearing down all those Hollywood myths of deception and looking at what modern psychology actually tells us about how to spot a lie. We're going to explore the hidden friction that happens inside the mind of someone who is actively constructing an alternate reality. And, more importantly, we'll cover exactly how you can spot the cracks in that reality. So let's start with a really fascinating question. Can you spot a liar just by looking at them? I mean, most of us completely buy into the pop culture myth that looking up and to the left, or maybe a sudden nervous twitch or a bead of sweat is a dead giveaway, right? We've been practically conditioned to look for that one magical clue. But modern psychology has a pretty harsh reality check for us. It turns out that whole approach is fundamentally flawed. Because here is the raw truth. There is no single reliable universal lie detector signal. Just take a second to let that sink in. The whole idea of a simple binary tell, like Pinocchio's nose, is a total myth. Things like cultural differences, personality types, and even just completely normal hesitation can easily mimic what we think of as lie signals. So relying on a single cue, you're basically just guessing. Section 1, the myth of the tell. Pop psychology versus modern science. Well, if there isn't a single universal signal, how do we actually spot deception? And where exactly did we go so wrong in our understanding? To understand this, we need a complete paradigm shift. The old pop psychology view essentially assumed lying with binary. It told us to look for single, isolated behavioral cues, and if you didn't spot them, well, you were dealing with a perfect liar. But modern psychology shows us deception is actually probabilistic. This means we absolutely have to stop looking for a snapshot in time and start watching a movie. The strongest detection comes from finding inconsistency patterns over time and identifying structural contradictions in a story. Section 2. The brain under pressure, friction, and cognitive load. Let's look at the psychological underlayer of what actually happens inside the brain when a lie is told. Because, as it turns out, lying is about so much more than just speaking false words. The absolute core mechanism at play here is called the cognitive load effect. Lying creates immense mental tracking and emotional tension simultaneously. You see, a person constructing an alternate reality has to maintain a false narrative against actual reality. Think of it kind of like trying to juggle 5 balls while balancing on one foot while answering complex math questions. The brain intensely struggles to maintain 2 competing realities without dropping something. You're forcing coherence under immense pressure. A lie acts as a high-maintenance system of constructed consistency. First, the actual truth must be actively suppressed. Then, a new narrative is constructed, which requires memory adjustment to meticulously align the real world with the fake one. The liar then has to maintain normal physical behavior while juggling all of this, which rapidly leads to massive stress accumulation. And finally, stage 6 happens: leakage. The cognitive capacity is completely overwhelmed, the system breaks down, and the truth just starts to seep out. Section 3, spotting the system leaks, where the brain drops the ball. Let's dive into what that cognitive leakage actually looks like in the real world. As observers trying to verify the truth and reduce uncertainty, we need to recognize how this mental friction leaks out into reality. And according to the research, there are 4 main categories of leakage we need to watch for: inconsistency, delay, overcompensation, and emotional mismatch. Let's break each of these down because, frankly, these are your real detection tools. First up, inconsistency signals. This happens because the real memory and the constructed story are misaligned. Think of someone trying to explain why they were late to work. First, it was traffic. Then, casually, they mentioned stopping for coffee before the highway. When you introduce questioning, the details suddenly become highly unstable. The story changes across time, details contradict each other, or the entire timeline has to quickly shift to accommodate a new fact you just brought up. They literally just can't keep the alternate reality stitched together. Second, we have delay signals. Now, we have to be really careful here not to overinterpret normal everyday hesitation. But what you're actually looking for are unnatural pauses or a heavy hesitation right before answering a critical question. It's an overcalculation in speech. The liar literally has to pause, calculate their alternate reality, check it for logical errors, and then speak. That processing time, it creates a very noticeable, unnatural delay. Third is overcompensation. You'll hear this forced certainty, phrases like honestly or trust me. You'll get excessive, completely unprompted detail just so they appear more credible. This is the liar attempting to control your perception by forcing coherence.
And here is the secret. Paradoxically, this intense effort to look truthful is actually a massive signal of high stress and cognitive load.
Finally, the fourth category is emotional mismatch signals. This is when the internal physiological arousal simply does not match the external content they're trying to project. You might see a completely flat, emotionless face while they're making a highly emotional claim. Or, conversely, you might see wildly exaggerated emotion over incredibly simple, mundane facts. The emotion and the content are operating on two completely different tracks.
Section 4, the triangulation strategy, the master toolkit for observers. So, how do we actively use these clues without falling right back into the trap of single cue judgments?
Modern psychology gives us this critical extension, triangulation. It is hands down the most reliable deception detection method we have. It requires you to cross-verify. You don't just listen to the words. You compare the stated story against the physical behavior, against external independent facts, and you do this across multiple time points. This is your master strategy. Deception naturally collapses when consistency is tested across multiple contexts and pressure levels. You can mentally map this out like a grid. Track the stated narrative, the physical behavior, and the external facts from time point 1 to time point 2. By tracking these variables systematically, structural contradictions become glaringly obvious. If the external facts change but the narrative forcefully stays exactly the same, or if the story wildly changes at time point 2 to fit those new facts, boom, you've spotted the system mismatch. You are successfully separating a stable truth from a degrading lie. Section 5, Deception Beyond Human Faces, Cross-Domain Transfer. What makes this framework so incredibly powerful is that this concept of cognitive load, friction, and system mismatch applies far beyond just human conversations.
Take cybersecurity, for example. In the digital realm, a cyber attack, like spoofing or phishing, is essentially just a lie told to a computer. And how are they caught? Well, they reveal themselves through pattern inconsistencies and identity verification systems. It's a structural contradiction in network behavior, timing, and structure, just like a human dropping the ball on a fabricated detail. The exact same logic goes for trading systems and finance. False narratives and market sentiment might drive a frenzy temporarily, sure, but they are eventually exposed because the actual price reveals the underlying inconsistency. The market acts as the ultimate external truth verifier, forcing false financial narratives to collapse under the immense pressure of objective facts. And even in a game like chess, bluffs and psychological traps on the board are essentially lies about an opponent's strength or intent. How do grandmasters expose them? They are mathematically evaluated and exposed through continuation lines and forced sequences. You test the bluff by applying pressure over time to see if the opponent's strategy degrades. It's literally triangulation on a 64-square grid.
The dominant pattern we've learned today is that truth remains stable across contexts, while lies consistently degrade under repetition and pressure. A lie is a forced coherence that simply cannot last forever. So the next time you're in a situation where you need to verify reality, whether it's a high-stakes negotiation, evaluating a leader's trust, or just a conversation, remember to stop looking for that one magical tell. It doesn't exist. Instead, ask yourself, are you just looking for a single clue, or are you pressure testing the entire system?